On a dusty, remote planet called Talum 4, the sun beat down hard, casting long shadows over the small town. The air was dry, and the buildings looked as though they might fall apart with one good gust of wind. In the middle of this lifeless town, a strange event was about to take place. An auction. Inside the old wooden building that served as the auction house, a crowd of people had gathered. Some were from distant planets, while others were locals. Strange creatures with blue skin, tall beings with too many arms, and a few humans scattered about. The auctioneer stood at the front, wearing a dusty black coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Looking out over the crowd with a sharp, calculating gaze, Jebediah Harlow, known as Jeb, sat in the back nursing a drink in his hand. He wasn't one for crowds. His life had been spent in solitude on his ranch, a barren piece of land he worked every day. But today was different. Jeb had heard about the auction and decided to see if he could find something useful for his land. Maybe some tools or supplies, anything to make his lonely life a little easier. The auctioneer called for silence, and the crowd fell quiet. He lifted a piece of paper in the air and read off the first item. Up for bid today, we have something unusual. A specimen, if you will, a being of great mystery. Let's see who will be brave enough to take this one home. Jeb's ears perked up. He was used to seeing livestock or strange items up for sale at these kinds of auctions. But a being of great mystery? That piqued his curiosity. The auctioneer pulled back a large curtain to reveal what could only be described as a giant. Standing at the front of the room was a tall woman, easily 8 feet tall. She was wearing a tattered dress, and most striking of all, her face was covered with a sack. The sack hung over her head, hiding any feature from view, but there was no mistaking her size. She was massive, and there was something almost regal about the way she stood, even if she looked like she had been through a lot. Whispers spread through the crowd. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she being sold at such a strange auction? Jeb squinted, studying the woman. His first instinct was to walk away. She was too big, too unusual. But then again, the thought of her standing there, alone and not knowing what was going on, struck something in him. The auctioneer's voice cut through the whispers. This, folks, is Lot 37, a unique being with, well, let's just say, an interesting background. We're starting the bidding at 2 credits. Who will give me 2 credits for Lot 37? Jeb's eyes widened. 2 credits? That was nothing. It was the price of a bottle of water. A woman like this could easily be worth much more. Why so cheap? Was there something he wasn't seeing? The crowd was silent, no one eager to make a move. Then the auctioneer looked around the room, his eyes stopping on Jeb in the back. 2 credits, Jeb heard himself say before he even realized he'd spoken. The auctioneer's eyes lit up and he turned toward Jeb. 2 credits from the gentleman in the back.
Do I hear 3?
No one else raised their hand. Jeb felt a little awkward, but he wasn't about to back down. He had already bid and he was curious. The woman intrigued him. Sold, the auctioneer called out. And just like that, Jeb had won the bid. The crowd clapped lightly, but no one seemed particularly interested. They all had their eyes on other lots. Jeb stood up and walked toward the woman, his boots creaking with each step. The auctioneer handed him a small piece of paper, and a strange feeling washed over Jeb. This wasn't just about winning an auction. There was something about this woman that made him feel uneasy, but at the same time there was a pull, something that made him want to know more. As he approached her, the woman didn't move. She just stood there, her head lowered, the sack still hanging over her face. Jeb hesitated for a moment before he spoke. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you're coming with me." There was no response at first, but then a voice, soft, almost too soft to hear, came from beneath the sack. "I am yours," she said. Jeb's heart skipped a beat. The voice was calm but had an underlying sadness to it. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but somehow hearing her speak made everything feel real. The auctioneer handed Jeb the paperwork. "She's all yours now, son. You take her wherever you like. We're done here." With that, Jeb took the woman by the arm and led her out of the auction house. The sun was setting as they walked out into the dusty street. The sky was painted in deep oranges and reds, the air cooler than it had been all day. Jeb glanced at the giant woman beside him. She was taller than he'd expected, but despite her size, she walked quietly, almost like a shadow. They reached Jeb's old ranch house, a weathered structure that had seen better days. The land around it was dry, cracked earth with only a few stubborn weeds pushing through. Jeb had tried to grow crops here, but the land was unforgiving. Still, it was home. "I have a place for you here," Jeb said, opening the door to his small house. "You can stay for as long as you need." The woman stepped inside, her movements slow, careful, as if she wasn't sure what was expected of her. She stood in the middle of the room, still silent, still with the sack covering her face. Jeb put his coat on a chair and turned to her. "I never got your name," he said quietly. "I can't just keep calling you ma'am." The woman stood there for a moment. Then, with a voice that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 stories, she spoke. "Anya," she said. "My name is Anya." The moment the words left her lips, the room felt colder. A chill ran down Jeb's spine. Something in the air shifted, like the ground beneath his feet had changed. He felt it deep in his gut, but he couldn't explain why. There was something important about the name, something that had been hidden for far too long. Before Jeb could say anything more, a loud sound echoed from the distance. It wasn't a storm, nor was it an animal. It was something deeper, something that came from the earth itself. The ground trembled lightly beneath their feet. Anya's eyes, though hidden behind the sack, seemed to darken with a quiet intensity. She turned her head slightly toward the window. Jeb followed her gaze, his heart racing. There was something out there, something he couldn't see but could feel in his bones. "Who's out there?" Jeb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Anya didn't answer. She simply stood still, her face still hidden. But Jeb could feel it. Whatever was coming wasn't just a passing storm. It was something much darker, something that had been waiting for them. The night stretched on, and Jeb knew one thing for sure: his life and his quiet ranch were about to change forever. Jeb stood by the window, his breath shallow as he tried to make sense of what he had just heard. The strange noise outside grew louder, sending vibrations through the wooden walls of his home. It wasn't the wind, nor an animal. It was something heavy, unnatural, almost as if the earth itself was trembling. He glanced over at Anya, whose figure was still silhouetted in the dim light of the room. Even though her face was hidden beneath the sack, Jeb could feel her awareness of the situation. She didn't seem scared, but rather waiting. For what, he didn't know. "Anya," Jeb said, his voice low. "What's happening?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned slowly toward him, her movements graceful despite her massive size. Then she took a step closer, her eyes still hidden, but Jeb could feel the weight of her presence. "The ground is awakening," Anya said quietly, her voice carrying an ancient tone, as though she had spoken these words countless times before. "It is the signal," Jeb frowned. "Signal? What do you mean?" "What's out there?" Anya stood still, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something far away. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since Jeb had met her, she seemed to let her guard down just for a moment. "The earth holds memories," she began, her voice soft but powerful. "Memories of an ancient time when beings like me roamed freely. But we were not meant to stay here. We were trapped. And now, the earth is calling." Jeb wasn't sure what she meant, but he could feel the truth in her words. He could hear the tremors outside growing louder, closer. Whatever was coming, it wasn't just a storm or a random event. It was something far more dangerous. Anya turned her head toward the door, and for the first time since meeting her, Jeb saw something flicker in her eyes. It was fear. Brief but undeniable. "I need to go outside," she said, her voice urgent. "There are those who will come for me. They know I've awakened." Jeb swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what she meant by those, but it didn't sound good. And now that he had her in his life, he couldn't just let her go alone. "We can't just stand here," Jeb said, his voice firm. "I'm not letting you face whatever's out there by yourself. If there's danger, we'll face it together." Anya looked at him, surprised by his words. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind, but she nodded. "Very well," she said. "But stay behind me. You are not ready for what's to come." Jeb didn't have time to argue. He grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair and pulled it on quickly. Together, they stepped outside. The night air was cool, the smell of dust and dried earth filling his nose. The tremors had stopped, but the tension in the air was thick. The horizon ahead was empty, save for the distant hills and the vast open land. But something was wrong. The ground wasn't still anymore. It seemed alive, shifting. Jeb's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced over at Anya, who stood taller than him, her posture alert, her eyes searching the dark horizon. And then, Jeb saw it. A shadow, large and moving, appeared against the backdrop of the dark sky. It was huge, like a mountain moving slowly but steadily toward them. Jeb's breath caught in his throat. "What is that?" he whispered, barely able to believe his eyes. "That," Anya replied, "is Razarok." Razarok was a name that Jeb had never heard before, but there was something in the way Anya said it, something that made Jeb's blood run cold. "Who is he?" Jeb asked, his voice shaking slightly. "What does he want with you?" Anya took a deep breath, her hands clenching into fists by her sides. "Razarok is a warlord. He is the leader of an army that has been searching for me for years. I am the last of my kind, and he believes that I hold the key to powers he wants to control. But he is mistaken." Jeb's head spun. He couldn't quite grasp all that Anya was saying. But he understood one thing clearly. Whoever this Razarok was, he meant trouble. The shadow grew closer, and now Jeb could hear the sound of heavy footsteps like thunder shaking the earth. His eyes widened as he saw what was causing the noise. Massive creatures, towering beings that seemed to be made of metal and flesh, were marching in perfect formation, led by a figure as tall as a mountain. Razarok was unlike any being Jeb had ever seen. His skin was dark and gleaming like polished obsidian, and his eyes glowed with a fierce red light. He carried a weapon that looked more like a massive spear than anything else, its end crackling with energy. The army of creatures behind him moved in perfect synchrony, each one massive and imposing, their eyes fixed on Anya. Jeb instinctively stepped in front of her, though he knew it wouldn't help. What could he possibly do against an army like that? Anya stepped forward, her voice low but strong. "Razarok, you will not have me." The warlord's voice boomed across the field, deep and filled with malice. "You cannot escape, Anya. You cannot hide forever. The power you hold is mine, and I will take it." Jeb felt a chill run down his spine. It was clear that Razarok wasn't going to just leave. There was no talking his way out of this. Anya had said she wasn't ready to face him, but Jeb knew now that they didn't have a choice. Anya closed her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opened them again, something in her had changed. There was no more fear, no hesitation. She stepped forward, her body glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The air around her shifted, and the earth beneath their feet seemed to hum with power. Razarok sneered as he raised his weapon. "You think you can stop me with your powers? You are nothing." But Anya wasn't afraid. She raised her hands, and the ground beneath them began to tremble once again. A glowing energy surrounded her, forming a shield of light that protected Jeb and herself. With a single motion, she flung the shield toward Razarok's army, sending them sprawling backward as the energy exploded outward, forcing them to retreat. Jeb watched in awe. The power radiating from Anya was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He had known she was special, but this was something else entirely. She wasn't just a woman. She was a force of nature. Razarok snarled in frustration, raising his weapon to strike back, but Anya's power surged again. This time, the energy twisted the air around her, forming a massive vortex that sent Razarok and his creatures flying into the distance. The warlord's army, stunned and disoriented, fell back as Anya continued to push them away. As the dust settled, Razarok's figure could barely be seen on the horizon. But it was clear. He was defeated, at least for now. Anya lowered her hands, and the energy around her dissipated. She was breathing heavily, but she had won. Jeb stood there, still in shock, trying to process what he had just witnessed. He had no idea who Anya really was or where she came from. But one thing was clear. She was not someone to be underestimated. And whatever this power was, it was only the beginning. Anya turned to him, her face softening. "Thank you, Jeb," she said, "for standing with me." Jeb nodded, still trying to find the words. "I didn't do anything. You were amazing." "We're not done yet," Anya replied, her voice steady. "Razarok will return, and when he does, we will be ready." Jeb looked out toward the horizon, knowing this was only the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could imagine.